September 10th, 1944. A tent outside Brussels. Two men stand over a map, facing each other. One has just demanded full control over the entire Allied war effort. The other is about to respond, and what he says in the next minute could determine the fate of World War II. Bernard Montgomery has told Dwight Eisenhower that he wants every gallon of fuel, every shell, every supply truck on the Western Front funneled exclusively to his British forces. He wants the American armies to halt completely. He wants Eisenhower to favor Britain over America. And he is making this demand while standing on Belgian soil bought with American blood. The Supreme Commander of all Allied forces in Europe stares at him. In the next 60 seconds, he must choose words that could either secure victory by Christmas or destroy the alliance, and lose the war entirely. This is the moment Eisenhower faced when Montgomery demanded absolute control over the supplies. August 25th, 1944. Paris falls. The largest military operation in history has smashed through German defenses in a way no one predicted. Allied forces advance from Normandy toward Germany at astonishing speed. The Third Army covers 400 miles in 26 days. The British Second Army moves 250 miles in 3 weeks. German forces collapse across France. Intelligence reports estimate the Wehrmacht has lost 500,000 men since D-Day. Berlin appears within reach. Then the fuel runs out. September 2nd, 1944. Patton's Third Army grinds to a halt, 40 miles from the German border. Not due to enemy resistance, but because supply depots are empty. Tank commanders watch German forces retreat while unable to pursue, trapped in stationary armor, burning with frustration as the enemy escapes. The problem is simple math and harsh physics. Allied supply lines stretch 450 miles from Normandy to the front. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every ration travels that distance by truck, and those trucks consume fuel as they go. The Red Ball Express races around the clock. 6,000 trucks, mostly driven by African-American quartermaster units, move 12,000 tons per day. The armies need 20,000. The numbers do not add up. Port capacity is the bottleneck. Cherbourg is damaged. Le Havre is damaged. Antwerp is captured, but its approaches remain under German control. Most supplies still come through the Normandy beaches where they landed on D-Day. 3 months of explosive advances have stretched logistics beyond breaking point. Montgomery sees opportunity where others see crisis. His Second Army has crossed into Belgium. Brussels is liberated. The British are now 280 miles closer to Berlin than 3 weeks ago. He believes that with full control of supplies, he could end the war within weeks. September 4th. Montgomery sends a message to Eisenhower's headquarters. Polite in tone, absolute in demand. Prioritize supplies for a concentrated drive through Belgium and Holland. Funnel everything to his narrow front. Halt American advances, and strike for Berlin by Christmas. His reasoning is compelling. A single, concentrated push could shatter German defenses before they recover, whereas broad front advances allow the enemy time to regroup. Concentration and speed at one point might achieve what scattered attacks across 400 miles cannot. Eisenhower reads the proposal. Strategically, it makes sense. Politically, it is a minefield. American forces outnumber British forces 2-1 on the Western Front. The U.S. provides 70% of Allied materials. And Montgomery wants Eisenhower to stop the American advance so that British forces can take everything. Eisenhower has been managing this coalition for 2 years. He understands the hidden tensions. British generals resent American inexperience. American commanders bristle at British caution. Churchill scrutinizes every decision with empire in mind. Roosevelt's generals answer to a public unwilling to see American boys die for British prestige. Montgomery either does not recognize these realities or does not care. He sees only military logic. His plan could work. It might win the war. And someone must make the hard decision. Montgomery pushes further. September 5th, he flies to Eisenhower's headquarters. Eisenhower is absent. He is in Granville, France, recovering from a knee injury sustained during an emergency plane landing. Montgomery is annoyed by the delay, but sends another, sharper message. A single, powerful thrust toward Berlin could end the German war. He wants to lead it personally, halt Patton's Third Army and Simpson's Ninth Army, redirect every supply truck north to the British Second Army and the American First Army under his control, and place Omar Bradley, the American Ground Forces commander, under British strategic direction. Eisenhower's staff read the message with growing alarm. Montgomery was proposing a command reorganization that would place British generals in charge of the very invasion they had been fighting alongside the Americans. 2 months after thousands of Americans had died on Omaha Beach, the political stakes were enormous. Newspapers across the United States would erupt. Congress would demand answers. The coalition that had held together since 1941 could splinter over a single decision. Yet Montgomery's argument carried weight. Intelligence reports confirmed that German forces were in disarray. The Wehrmacht that had conquered France in 1940 was a shadow of itself. Fuel shortages crippled German armor. Entire divisions existed only on paper, lacking men and equipment. Border fortifications along the Siegfried Line were thinly manned. A concentrated strike might break through before winter set in. Beyond the Rhine, Allied armies would be in Germany's industrial heart, potentially collapsing war production. The Soviet advance from the east remained 400 miles from Berlin. A decisive western push could reach the capital first, ending the war and saving millions of lives. Eisenhower weighed these calculations daily, but he also considered what Montgomery ignored. What if the concentrated thrust failed? If 30 divisions pushed north and were stopped, the entire Western Front will be committed to a single axis. German reserves could concentrate against that one threat, while American forces scattered across France would sit idle as British units fought alone. September 10th. Montgomery demanded a face-to-face meeting. Eisenhower agreed. They met at Brussels airport. Eisenhower's knee still troubled him, so he remained aboard his aircraft. Montgomery entered, and the discussion began professionally. Maps were spread across the small table. Montgomery presented his plan with meticulous detail. He required total priority. Everything, not a share of supplies, not partial support. His tone assumed Eisenhower would recognize the logic. Eisenhower listened, expression unreadable. Montgomery was one of Britain's most accomplished commanders. He had defeated Rommel and El Alamein when victory was desperately needed, planned the D-Day ground campaign, and led his forces through Normandy with skill. Eisenhower respected him, but respect did not equal agreement. Montgomery finished. He waited for approval. Instead, Eisenhower spoke of the broad front strategy. The Supreme Commander believed that attacking on multiple axes prevented the Germans from concentrating their defenses, forced them to defend everywhere, and preserved the alliance by advancing all national contingents together. Montgomery interrupted, his patience exhausted. He argued that a broad front advance was militarily unsound, squandering the momentum gained at such cost in Normandy. Political considerations should not outweigh military necessity. Someone had to make the hard choice. The words hung in the small aircraft cabin. Military necessity. Hard choice. Someone must decide. Montgomery had just accused the Supreme Commander of lacking courage, of letting politics override strategy, of prolonging the war. Eisenhower's face changed. Those who served under him rarely saw him angry. He ruled through patience, consensus, and careful diplomacy, keeping the fragile alliance intact by making all commanders feel heard. Montgomery had just questioned everything. The Supreme Commander leaned forward. His voice remained calm, but the cabin felt colder. He told Montgomery that the supply crisis was temporary, that Antwerp's opening would solve the logistics problem, and that no single thrust would take precedence at the expense of others. The broad front strategy was not up for debate. Montgomery pressed on. He argued that the moment was now, that waiting for Antwerp would allow German defenses to solidify, that concentrated force historically outperformed dispersed advances. His tactical reasoning was strong, his strategic vision clear. Eisenhower had reached his limit. "Steady, Monty," Eisenhower said. "You cannot speak to me like that. I am your boss." 6 quiet words in a military transport plane over Belgium. A reminder to Britain's most senior field commander that the chain of command ran through one person. The moment crystallized the alliance itself. Britain had entered the war in 1939, fought alone after France fell, lost 60,000 civilians to German bombing, contributed planning, intelligence, and experience that made D-Day possible, and now an American general with less combat experience was telling Montgomery no. Military rank was absolute. Eisenhower commanded. Montgomery did not. Montgomery absorbed the rebuke and shifted tactics. Instead of demanding everything, he proposed Operation Market Garden, a bold airborne assault to seize bridges across Holland's rivers and canals, creating a corridor for ground forces to advance toward the industrial heart of Germany. Not the full thrust he desired, but close enough. Eisenhower considered it. The operation was ambitious. 3 airborne divisions dropped 60 miles behind enemy lines, tasked with holding multiple bridges until ground forces could relieve them. The plan required flawless coordination, precise timing, and sufficient supplies to support the operation while maintaining pressure elsewhere. Eisenhower agreed. Market Garden would receive priority. Montgomery would gain additional supplies, including American airborne divisions, while Patton's Third Army continued advancing in the South. Bradley's forces carried on in their sectors. The broad front strategy remained intact. Montgomery accepted this compromise, convinced that once Market Garden succeeded, once British armor crossed the Rhine and threatened the industrial heart of Germany, Eisenhower would have no choice but to shift everything north. This, he believed, would prove the validity of concentrated thrust doctrine. After Market Garden, the argument would be settled. September 17, 1944. 20,000 paratroopers descended into Holland. British XXX Corps began its push north along a single highway. The largest airborne operation in history was underway. Montgomery's vindication was 60 miles ahead. When plans collided with reality, challenges emerged immediately. The 82nd Airborne seized bridges at Nijmegen after fierce fighting. The 101st Airborne captured objectives around Eindhoven despite heavy casualties. But the British 1st Airborne Division, landing at Arnhem, the furthest bridge, faced immediate trouble. German resistance was stronger than anticipated. Intelligence had missed 2 SS Panzer divisions refitting in the area. Paratroopers landed 8 miles from their objective instead of directly on it. Radio equipment failed. Resupply drops missed their targets. The single highway XXX Corps relied on to reach them became a deadly gauntlet. September 20th. British forces at Arnhem were surrounded. They held a perimeter at the north end of the bridge, but could not break out. XXX Corps remained stuck 11 miles south. German artillery pounded the highway, destroying every vehicle and blocking any advance. The plan that looked brilliant on maps was bleeding to death in Dutch farmland. September 25th, Operation Market Garden ended. The British 1st Airborne Division withdrew across the Rhine, having suffered 1,485 killed and 6,414 captured. American airborne divisions endured over 3,500 casualties. The bridges had been intended to open a highway to the industrial heart of Germany. Instead, they demonstrated that concentrated thrusts into fortified territory without absolute supply superiority were doomed to fail. Montgomery never admitted Market Garden was a mistake. He argued it was 90% successful, that it had secured vital territory, and that it would have succeeded with more supplies, support, and priority. His reports to London emphasized gains while downplaying losses. Eisenhower said nothing publicly. Privately, he noted that the concentrated thrust Montgomery had demanded so forcefully had cost 10,000 Allied casualties and achieved none of its strategic objectives. Meanwhile, the broad front strategy, supposedly wasting opportunities, continued advancing along multiple axes. Supplies that Montgomery argued should go entirely to his command were sustaining gains that actually worked. October 1944. Antwerp's approaches remained contested. The 1st Canadian Army fought brutal battles through flooded, boulder-strewn terrain to clear the Scheldt estuary. The port would not open until November. Supply challenges persisted. Every commander sought priority. Every advance competed for scarce resources. Montgomery submitted another proposal, another concentrated thrust, claiming political considerations were hindering military success. Eisenhower read these messages with growing impatience. The alliance required unity. Montgomery provided constant friction. December 16, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge began. German forces launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes. 3 German armies struck a thinly defended section of the American lines. Surprise was total. Shock was complete. The attack exploited exactly the vulnerability that concentrated thrust doctrine creates. While Montgomery had sought to focus everything north, Eisenhower's broad front approach kept forces distributed. Now, those distributed forces faced Hitler's last gamble. The initial German breakthrough was catastrophic. American units were surrounded, scattered, and destroyed. Entire regiments vanished into the winter forests. The assault penetrated 50 miles into Allied lines. For 48 hours, the situation appeared dire. Eisenhower responded with the flexibility the broad front strategy allowed. He shifted reserves from quiet sectors to the Bulge. Patton's Third Army pivoted 90 degrees north within 48 hours to strike the German flank. British forces moved south to block any advance toward Antwerp. The same distributed forces Montgomery had criticized became the mobile reserve that contained the crisis. December 20th, Eisenhower made a controversial decision. He temporarily placed American forces north of the breakthrough under Montgomery's command. The front was split. Bradley's headquarters, south of the Bulge, could not communicate reliably with forces to the north. Montgomery could coordinate the northern response faster. The move was tactically necessary and politically explosive. American units that fought their way from Normandy were now taking orders from the British commander, who had just failed at Market Garden. Montgomery handled it carefully at first, coordinating the defense, positioning British reserves, and ensuring German spearheads could not reach Antwerp. The situation stabilized. By Christmas, the German offensive was contained. By January, it was collapsing. January 7th, 1945. Montgomery held a press conference. He claimed to have taken command of American forces north of the Bulge and directed the defensive victory. His words implied that British leadership had saved disorganized American units. British newspapers hailed his brilliance. American papers erupted in fury. Eisenhower read the reports with cold anger. Montgomery had just violated the fundamental rule of coalition warfare. Never claim credit in ways that humiliate your allies. Never turn military operations into a contest of national prestige. Never make public statements that undermine trust. Bradley was furious. Patton was furious. American commanders who had fought through the Ardennes demanded that Eisenhower remove Montgomery from command. The political crisis Montgomery's supply demands could have triggered was now unfolding anyway, this time over his own public statements. Eisenhower drafted a message to the combined chiefs of staff, diplomatic in wording but unmistakable in meaning. Montgomery had to retract his implications about American incompetence, or Eisenhower would request his relief. The Supreme Commander was ready to force Britain into a choice between Montgomery and the alliance itself. Churchill stepped in. He understood what Eisenhower's staff already knew. Britain was now the junior partner. American manpower, production, and logistics dominated the Western Front. If it came down to British pride versus Allied unity, Britain would lose. Under pressure, Montgomery issued a minimal, grudging clarification, enough to avert a rupture, too little to show any real contrition. The crisis passed, the alliance held, and Montgomery learned nothing. January 1945. Allied forces cleared the Ardennes Bulge, and resumed their advance into Germany. The broad front strategy Montgomery had criticized for 6 months had endured its greatest test. Distributed forces had provided the flexibility to contain disaster and launch counterattacks from multiple directions. Montgomery proposed another concentrated thrust, this time aiming to cross the Rhine in the north and push toward Berlin. He argued that a focused strike could still end the war quickly. Eisenhower read the proposal with weary patience. He denied it. Multiple armies would cross the Rhine at multiple points. Exploitation of bridgeheads would follow opportunity and enemy resistance. No single commander would get everything. No single axis would take absolute priority. March 7, 1945. The American 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact, marking the first Rhine crossing, a chance event, seized by junior officers who found a bridge the Germans had failed to destroy. Eisenhower's broad front approach, striking on multiple axes, achieved what Montgomery's concentrated thrust at Arnhem could not. March 22nd. Patton's Third Army crossed at Oppenheim. March 23rd. Montgomery's forces crossed at Wesel after massive preparation, including the largest airborne operation since Market Garden. By April, the entire Western Front was across the Rhine and pushing into Germany. Montgomery advanced north toward Hamburg. Bradley drove through central Germany, and Patton raced through Bavaria. The broad front, once criticized as wasteful, now pressed German forces across 400 miles, preventing any effective concentration of defenses. April 30th, Hitler committed suicide. May 7th, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe had ended. The strategy Eisenhower defended against Montgomery's repeated demands for 6 months had delivered total victory. The historical debate began immediately. Montgomery's supporters argued concentrated thrusts were correct, that Market Garden could have succeeded with more supplies, and that political concerns had slowed victory. They cited September 1944 as a missed chance to reach Berlin with momentum. Eisenhower's supporters pointed to repeated failures of concentrated operations and the way the broad front maintained alliance cohesion while steadily defeating German forces. Its flexibility during the Ardennes showed the value of distributed forces. Months of argument over supplies Montgomery never truly needed cost more time than the shortages themselves. Primary sources clarify the picture. Ultra intercepts revealed the Wehrmacht was more resilient than Allied intelligence estimated in September 1944. German commanders anticipated concentrated thrusts and positioned reserves accordingly. The broad front forced constant retreat, because defending everywhere meant defending effectively nowhere. Supply records show Montgomery's forces received substantial priority from Market Garden, and it failed anyway, not from lack of material, but because 3 airborne divisions could not hold a 60-mile corridor against determined armored counterattacks. Whether in autumn and winter 1944 brought heavy rains that would have stalled any concentrated armored advance, regardless of supply, broad front operations endured because they did not depend on a single axis. Even before final victory, the Cold War was underway. Soviet forces occupied Eastern Europe. Churchill pressed Eisenhower to race for Berlin, but Eisenhower refused. Berlin lay in the agreed Soviet zone. Pursuing political objectives would have meant higher casualties for symbolic gain. The broad front carried through to the end, guided by military logic rather than political theater. Montgomery never admitted his concentrated thrust doctrine had failed. In his memoirs, he continued to criticize Eisenhower's caution. After the war, Montgomery continued to advocate for single-axis strategies. He remained convinced that September 1944 represented a lost opportunity for a decisive victory. Eisenhower, by contrast, never publicly criticized Montgomery's repeated demands. His memoirs are measured and diplomatic, while private letters to Marshall reveal both frustration and understanding. Managing the alliance required accepting inevitable friction. Montgomery's tactical brilliance outweighed his strategic inflexibility and political tone-deafness, but it could not replace the broader responsibilities of coalition command. The numbers speak clearly. From D-Day to the German surrender, Allied casualties in Northwest Europe totaled roughly 766,000, while German losses exceeded 2 million. The broad front approach that Montgomery had opposed for 6 months ground down the enemy across all sectors, while maintaining the cohesion and flexibility of the coalition. Concentrated thrusts look elegant on maps, promising decisive victories through overwhelming force as single point, appealing to commanders who want to be remembered for brilliant maneuvers. Yet they fail when enemy resistance is underestimated, when supplies cannot keep pace, or when weather and terrain disrupt the timetable. Broad front operations are messier. They lack the narrative drama of a sudden breakthrough, the heroes who win a war in one bold stroke. But they succeed by forcing the enemy to defend everywhere, exploiting opportunities as they appear, and retaining the flexibility to respond to surprises. September 10th, 1944, the meeting in Brussels. Montgomery demanded all the supplies for his concentrated thrust. Eisenhower refused. That decision prevented a political crisis that could have fractured the alliance. It preserved the broad front strategy that survived the Ardennes, crossed the Rhine at multiple points, and kept Patton and Bradley advancing, while Montgomery received enough support from Market Garden. Montgomery was a superb tactical commander. El Alamein. D-Day planning proved that. But strategy requires more than tactical skill. It demands understanding logistics, politics, coalition dynamics, and the reality that wars are won by nations, not individuals. Eisenhower understood all of this. His patience with Montgomery's demands, his refusal to sacrifice the alliance over strategic disputes, and his insistence on balancing military effectiveness with political cohesion delivered victory. Not the flashy, single-stroke triumph Montgomery promised, but a comprehensive defeat of Nazi Germany. Eisenhower never enjoyed the glory of one dramatic breakthrough. Instead, he preserved the alliance through 2 years of constant friction, balancing American confidence with British experience, absorbing criticism from subordinates who thought they could do his job better, and making the decisions that actually won the war. When Montgomery demanded all the supplies, Eisenhower's words were simple: "Steady, Monty. You can't talk to me like that. I'm your boss." 6 words that define the interplay between coalition politics and military strategy. Montgomery wanted to be remembered as a general who ended World War II with one decisive strike. Eisenhower knew that victory required maintaining the alliance, keeping operational flexibility, and grinding the enemy down across all sectors until collapse was inevitable. History proved him right. Not immediately, not dramatically, but completely. The broad front strategy he defended against 6 months of pressure from Britain's most famous field commander delivered total victory. Market Garden failed. A concentrated thrust in September 1944 will fail for the same reasons: supplies, weather, German resistance, operational complexity. The true what if of World War II is not whether Montgomery had succeeded with concentrated thrust, but what would have happened if Eisenhower had fractured the alliance to give him what he demanded? American public opinion could have turned against the European war. Churchill's government would have faced criticism for subordinating U.S. forces to British command. The unity that sustained the coalition might have collapsed, giving Germany, even in decline, the space to regroup. Eisenhower prevented that, not with a dramatic confrontation, not by threatening or relieving Montgomery, but by asserting clearly who commanded and what strategy would be followed. "Steady, Monty. You can't talk to me like that. I'm your boss." Leadership in coalition warfare requires patience, diplomacy, and the ability to absorb criticism from subordinates who believe they know better. It also requires the courage to say no when compromise would sacrifice strategic coherence or political unity. Eisenhower balanced all of it for 2 years. That balance won the war. Montgomery demanded supplies because he believed concentrated forces win battles. Eisenhower denied them because he knew coalitions win wars. Both were military professionals arguing their doctrines, but only one understood that World War II was not merely a tactical problem solved with operational brilliance. It was a political military challenge, requiring America, Britain, and all Allied nations to remain committed to total victory. Eisenhower's statement to Montgomery was more than a rebuke to a difficult subordinate. It was a declaration about how democracies fight wars, not through autocratic brilliance or individual genius, but through coalition strength, coordinated effort, and the patience to wear down enemies who cannot match industrial production or sustain pressure. The story of Brussels is important because it reveals the invisible tensions that shaped the outcome of World War II. Every celebrated military operation happened because of political military decisions. The alliance that made those operations possible is rarely noticed. Bernard Montgomery was a brilliant tactical commander who never grasped strategy. Dwight Eisenhower was a capable tactical commander who mastered it. In September 1944, when Montgomery demanded all the supplies and Eisenhower said no, the Supreme Commander made a decision that led to total victory 8 months later. Where are you watching from? And here's my question. If you were in Eisenhower's position, facing pressure from a more experienced British commander with a plan that might work, would you have given Montgomery what he demanded, or made the same decision Eisenhower did? Let me know in the comments. Because of you, Eisenhower's steady leadership and the millions who served under him in the greatest military coalition in history will never be forgotten.